welcome to Board Gamers Anonymous, the podcast of board gamers and the insane fun we have at the table together. This is Chris.
Hey, this is Anthony.
And I'm Jeff.
And this is episode 506, Game Design, Quantity versus Quality. We like to thank all our Patreon backers for helping us bring you a brand new episode. Hello, friends. We're back, and we're back with one of our friends, Jeff. Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you very much. And thanks to you as well, Anthony, for having me on the show. It's always nice to chat with you guys. Appreciate the time. Was really looking forward to talking to you about this particular topic, especially in light of, I think, all of our recent experiences at PAX, looking at all the newest, latest, and greatest stuff that's either already out or coming down the pike. So definitely looking forward to chatting a little bit about where games have gone, in the past few years compared to kind of where, at least I remember them being an old dude, when I sort of re-entered the hobby. So looking forward to this conversation tonight.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's a cool topic. You messaged us back in August, but it was like a week before we started our 11-week run, the top 100.
Yeah.
So it's taken a little while to get it together, but I love the topic. It's something that I think about a lot with my teaching, but also just in general. And Chris, you and I even had this conversation a couple times at PAX about just what games are today and how they're being developed. And it is like a lot of like gumbo stew. Like, let's throw everything in and see if it all comes out and flows together. And sometimes you get something really cool, and sometimes you get something that's just like a lot. So it'll be interesting to talk about that idea of quantity versus quality, where the line is, and how like subjectivity comes into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. I also want to just give a shout out to you guys. I really enjoyed your episodes leading up to the big milestone there. Congratulations. I did a podcast for quite a few years there, but you guys have beaten me soundly with all of the episodes and the content that you've created. And, from a person who did it for a little while to you guys who have been doing it for ages, just allow me to express my gratitude to you guys and everybody else out there who creates this kind of content for people, basically free of charge. Patreon's a great thing. It allows people to contribute and express their gratitude in that way. But by and large, what we do is for the love of the hobby and trying to build community. And you guys have been a part of that for quite some time. So congratulations on that milestone. It was a lot of fun to listen to. And I just wanted to kind of have a chance to share that with you.
Absolutely, Jeff. Thank you so much. And Jeff, your background and your experience podcasting, if people want to catch up on it and maybe find it in other places, where would they go?
Well, I appreciate you asking about that. My podcast ended pretty much when the pandemic hit. That was a time of great change for a lot of us. And at that time, working in education, my wife being a nurse, it was just a little too much going on for us for me to continue with the show. And so basically, I decided to kind of step away from it. I had a couple of very generous gentlemen offer to kind of take over the reins of the show, and they ran it for a while for me. But eventually we just kind of called it and stopped broadcasting. However, funny you should mention it, because a couple of wonderful people, kind of spearheaded by Joel Pettit over on BGG, he actually offered, he said to me, hey, all of the links for all of your old podcast episodes from the Longview are kind of broken. They don't, you can't really access them anymore. And it's because I wasn't, going to be able to continue to pay web hosting fees for a show that wasn't even live anymore. I did it for a few years, but then I had to kind of stop. My wife was not happy with me spending that money when I wasn't actually doing anything. And so what Joel did is he's like, hey, there's this thing called YouTube, and I can post all of the episodes of the old show on YouTube. And that way, if people do want to listen to any of the episodes, they can feel free to kind of go back and look at it. So it's on YouTube as the Longview Archive. Right now, they've got 6 episodes that they've uploaded. There's God, I think there's at least 150, all said and done. And just for people who might not have heard of the show because it ended a while ago, my kind of shtick, if you want to call it that, was I basically tried to not do so much of the review of what's new. I would kind of find people in the community who had a passion or a love for a specific game. These are people who might have played a game 20, 30, 50, 100 times or more. And we would do an entire episode, usually somewhere between 40 minutes and an hour, about that one game and what they thought made that game so special. And whether I had played it or not, we kind of opened that discussion and talked about the game in detail and in depth, which resonated with some people, and they liked that. Some people, it was too much about one single game, but there was quite a lovely little loyal following of the show there for a while. And these guys, Joel, and I keep trying to look in the thread to find the other gentleman who also volunteered to help with that. But they're kind of working to bring it back. So I kind of gave them the key to that folder in my Google Drive where all of the episodes live. And they're bringing them back from the dead and putting them up on the Longview archive. So if anybody has any interest in checking that out, I would encourage you to do that. You might find one of your favorite games there, and be curious to see if the episodes hold up and if people still find them interesting to listen to. So thanks for the opportunity to talk about that. I appreciate it.
Excellent. And thanks so much for, like you said, all the content creators out there providing a gift of advocacy for the hobby. And especially when it comes to tabletop gaming and our topic today, the complexity of tabletop gaming. For everybody out there who teaches games, who breaks things down, who opens things up to people, we are tremendously grateful. All right. Well, with that said, Anthony, we got something going on with Board Game Academics.
We've been talking about this for a few weeks, and we have our first Victory Points essay is going up right now. You should be able to read it on the website, boardgameacademics.com. So this first essay from Mel Gomez-Erickson is titled Finding Safety in Blood on the Clocktower's Community of Liars. It's a wonderful essay about the unique nature of Blood on the Clocktower as a social deduction game and how it's an inclusive and welcoming space because of how it's designed and how that community has kind of grown up online. So it's a wonderful essay. You can check it out on the website. And of course, if you have an essay of your own, we are still accepting new submissions ongoing, right? As rolling acceptances. So if you have something, if you want us to take a look, if you have an idea, if you have an outline, I'm happy to work with you and give feedback on, what you're working on and whether it's going to be a good fit or what needs to be done to get it there. But if you have an essay, even better, just shoot it through and we'll give you feedback and then send it up. So we are posting once a month, and this is a paid opportunity. There's a stipend for everybody who's published. So it's a great opportunity to get your name out there, to explore ideas and the diversity and just amazing nature of tabletop gaming as a hobby, but also just as part of our lifestyles. So congrats to Mel as being our first published author on the Victory Points column, and here's to many, many more.
That's fantastic. And I got to say, I love that title. That title gave me a chuckle. I like that blood community of blood of traitors. Was it liars or traitors?
Liars, yeah.
Liars. I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. Yeah, it's you don't think of social deduction games as being like a safe space, but they really make the case. This is a safe space, and here's why.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, Jeff, just as you were talking before we got on the podcast too, talking about PAX Unplugged, it's interesting. There's, tens of thousands of people at these conventions and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people out there playing tabletop gaming. And typically a lot of those people are faces in the crowd and they're looking for a game, they're looking for a table, they're looking for a community. And it can be challenging and you can feel anonymous amongst everybody else out there. You just want to get in, but nobody knows you and maybe feels like it doesn't fit in. And what I really like about these Victory Point essays is that people who do feel anonymous, who do have a community or seeking a community or have found a community through a game, can actually sit down and put into words what that really means to them. And this is the start of something big. And thanks to Game Pathways for making it possible to support people out there, for putting together these stories and these academic essays so that more people can know how to get connected and be more connected with people in communities that maybe are anonymous in some ways.
I think it's a very important point that you're making here, which is the idea of community and connections, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we even before the imposed isolation of the pandemic, which is really a generational defining event.
Sure.
I think history is going to look back on that
100%.
and say that. But
yeah.
I mean, as a teacher, I know that it was a generational defining event based on the effect on students and families, right? But even before that, the sort of I forget the author of this, but it was kind of this idea that we all live in a bubble of personal preference, right? You don't listen to the radio, you listen to your playlist, right? You're not really engaging with people around you. You have your earbuds in, right? You're even able to watch a show that you want to watch on your phone, right? You don't have to really engage with people. And I think that while that is wonderful in a lot of ways, right? Because you get to explore your personal interests, you don't have to deal with some of the things that we all used to be annoyed by, dealing with, commercials, for example. I know my tolerance for commercials has gone way down, right? But even the idea of riding in a car with a radio, right? How many times you'd be like, oh my God, I got to listen to this song again. I hate this song, right? I never have to deal with that anymore. But I also don't get the opportunity to hear things that are unexpected. I don't get to hear something new that I didn't know about. I don't have the opportunities because of my sort of self-selection of my environment to be exposed to new ideas, new people, new ways of thinking. And I think that after years and years of that, people are starting to yearn for that.
Mm-hmm.
They're starting to look for connections. They're starting to think about the idea of, I miss connection, right? I miss people, right? I don't necessarily like a lot of people, but I miss people, right? And so I think tabletop gaming is one of those things that is very unique because while I certainly support people who are solo gamers and people who find tremendous stimulation, solace, pleasure in that endeavor, for me personally, gaming is like 90% about the people that I'm playing with, right? Mm-hmm. It's that connection with friends. It's the meeting new people, like you just discussed at PAX. That looking to make connections with other people is really, I think, becoming more and more crucial. And I think that tabletop gaming is a great way to do that because it is, in general, it is a endeavor that you're looking to do with other people, whether it's role-playing games or board games. And I think that the proof of that actually can also be found in video gaming, because what do people do with video games now? They're networking with other people, right? It's not enough just to sit and go through Zelda by yourself, right? People are generally seeming to look for opportunities to engage with other people. Sometimes people they don't even know, but they're part of that community of that particular game, right? So I think that there's a reason that this hobby is a really great way for people to meet each other, engage with each other, and form bonds and relationships with each other. And it's one of the things that I'm happiest about when I think about being involved in this hobby. So, I just kind of wanted to highlight that because I think it's something that's increasingly important, and I think is going to continue to be important moving forward.
100% agree. I mean, yeah, these, like you said, with the pandemic and the lockdown, especially, brought into focus the fact that in this digital age, this information age, more and more things are curated for us through algorithms, which is wonderful, but also incredibly painfully limiting without our knowledge. So we are not able to expand and explore and discover. Discovery is really an important part of it. So we do feel limited. We do feel pigeonholed. We do feel narrow as far as that's concerned. So these experiences help open us up. I am not a social deduction gamer by trade, but this article might open that up to me and open up a different perspective. So we want to have as many of those different perspectives as possible because we wouldn't know. So, and again, you don't know until you try. And that's what tabletop gaming is all about. It's about giving you interesting experiences, interesting choices, interesting different people at the table just through a bunch of cardboard, which is fantastic. So it's a little bit of alchemy going on there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's what's going on with everyone here, of course. Let's jump on to our acquisition disorders. So, Anthony, what do you have up for us this week?
All right. So this one came up as an announcement while we were at PAX, I think. I think you showed it to me. This is part of Shut Up and Sit Down Presents.
Yes.
A new endeavor. I guess this came up the week before, but I didn't see it until then. And one of the two games that they're bringing out with Play to Z is Dogs of War. And then I was looking at it and I was like, why is that familiar to me? Yes, this was one of the favorite games of a friend of mine back in Pittsburgh, Michael, that is incredibly hard to find. This was kickstarted by Simon, back then, Cool Meaning or Not, back in 2014. It was backed by like 1,200 people for like $66,000. Very few copies of the game were printed as a result, and it is extremely expensive and hard to find. So my friend Michael had a copy. We played it a lot, and it's a fantastically interesting game. It's designed by Paolo Mori, who has done lots of games kind of similar to this, just like small and direct and lots of interesting decisions. So Libertalia, Ethnos, Fall of Rome, Blitzkrieg. So like these types of games, like there's a lot of interaction. You're making interesting decisions. We'll get into that later, but like he's one of the designers I think of when I think of like not a ton of decisions to make, but all of them are difficult. And so Dogs of War is, it's Simonified. It's overproduced and big, goofy looking miniatures and ridiculous looking like characters. But at the end of the day, what you're doing is you are bidding on these different locations with strength, right? You're putting out your different, pieces and you're putting them on these different places to try to capture different abilities and different things you're gonna be able to do to work your way up in different amounts of basically like your influence within these different spaces. So it is highly interactive. It's like a reverse auction style bidding game. And it's a lot of fun. And every time I play it, I'm like, I don't know. I don't like area majority games. I don't like influence games. Like it's always just turns into like this tug of war where one person's always like too short of what they need. But this game has like the way it spreads out the decision space where there are multiple places to go. There's multiple ways to interact with it. There's multiple ways to mess with it along the way where your opponents don't realize you're doing it. It's a very elegant game. In ways that these games typically are not. So I was excited to hear that they're bringing it back because it's 10 years old. Didn't seem like it was ever coming back. And here it is. So it is going to be similar rules. We're getting a smaller box. The price is coming down. But I mean, it wasn't that expensive in the first place. It was like $50, $60. But now it's like $300 because you can't find it anywhere. New artwork, which I love because I did not like the old artwork. Again, it's like that Simon crazy shoulder pads on shoulder pads look. Not a big fan. And it's coming straight to retail because that's what this new line of games is doing. So highly recommend checking it out. I love the look of the cover already. It's definitely like it keeps that vibe, like medieval. We're fighting over space. It's area control, but it's not like here are all the crazy looking nobles who are fighting it out. And I cannot tell from the information they put out so far if they're like swapping out the miniatures for like meeples, which you absolutely could do, or if they'll just be fewer miniatures and you'll just have them for the leaders themselves. But this is definitely a game I'm going to track down because I've wanted a copy since the first time I played it several years ago, and now it will be possible. So that is Dogs of War.
And ironically, their other game that they are presenting, backing kind of thing, is also another animal game. But I mean, Dogs of War isn't an animal game. It's an expression
Right, yeah.
The other
it's got
one's
animal in the title.
Yeah, the other one's Animal Rescue Team, and I'm just like, oh, two games about animals. That's adorable. It's like, oh no, this is about war.
Yeah.
But the other one is Animal Rescues, where you're trying to rescue animals. So I'm interested in that one. So there you go.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that one's a new game, and Dogs of War is obviously 10 years old, so they're just kind of doing the Dice Tower essential thing of like bringing back old stuff.
100%. Yeah. And
But
an
a
animal
more interesting game. So
yeah, an Animal Rescue Team is designed by Matt Leacock.
right.
From, obviously from Pandemic and Daybreak and Forbidden Island, and has teamed up with a real world animal rescuer. So there's actually some real dynamics there. And it's about rescuing animals big and small from, all these catastrophes and things like that. So it could be distressed chickens or other animals that are dealing with things, and you're trying to rescue cows. And
Distressed chickens.
there's a lot of distressed chickens out there, man. If you're a chicken out there, you're not.
What would cause the chicken distress? I like that. I like that. Distress.
Well, we're gonna find out in this game.
Yeah.
We're gonna take care of that. That chicken. We're gonna de-stress that chicken.
Relax, chicken. Relax.
Some chicken with some anxiety issues.
It's the whole chicken and egg thing. It's really feeling the pressure of that question. So yeah, those are two I guess new incredible games from Play to Z, which is really a cool pun. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's exciting. At first, I was like, "Oh, another one of these," and I'm like, "Oh, they picked interesting games." So good on them for doing that.
Yeah. How about you, Geoff? Anything that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff I got at PAX I'm looking forward to. Games like SETI, that was the first game that I kind of ran over to the Czech Games room and bought that. That's definitely one that I'm looking forward to. I got my first play of Civolution in, the new one from Stefan Feld. And that's interesting for sure. Haven't quite figured out exactly how I feel about it, but that's interesting. What else did I pick? I picked up a bunch of stuff. Played a game called Flatiron, which is probably one of the best 2-player games I've played in a long time. But I did actually back 2 Kickstarters, which are the first ones I've backed in a while. One of them is Vestige, that I'm pretty interested in. That one comes from Orange Nebula. And it's sort of a little bit of a spiritual successor to Vindication, which is one of my favorite games. Absolutely love Vindication. Love the sort of core system of it, and how that game operates, especially with the Chronicles expansion, which kind of turns it into a little bit of a storytelling kind of a thing that goes along with the sort of brilliant mechanics of the game. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then, oh my goodness, it is escaping me. I don't know if you guys saw it on Kickstarter. What is it? It's like a Storyfold or something, I believe it's called. And this is a game that kind of utilizes a spiral bound book with cards, and it's sort of an adventure game, a solo game. Still looking for some solo games that I can enjoy. I picked up 20 Strong at PAX to give that a shot. That's another solo game. And this one looks really interesting because it's sort of the marriage of that idea of the spiral-bound book being different locations and places that you can go to in the game depending on the choices that you make, and then the cards that kind of come out populate the different areas, and you're trying to sort of save the forest from the corruption that's creeping in. And it just looked really interesting. It was a very reasonable price point. It was like $40, which it's hard to find Kickstarters that are reasonable anymore. Same thing for Vestige. I want to give them a shout out. Like the basic edition of Vestige is like $50. And it's like, okay, that's a reasonable price for a game. You get some nice wooden components, some nice cards, some neoprene playmats that come with it. And it's like, all right, I'm in. You're not charging me $250. So
right.
Those are 2 that I'm kind of looking forward to.
Excellent.
Yeah, I love that they came back. Like the Vindication's a big game, so like coming back to like spiritual successor, some similar ideas, but much smaller, more compact, more accessible. It's great.
Yeah, that's the thing these days, where these companies are coming out with massive games, right? Like Voidfall, and then they're like, maybe we shrink it down, maybe we make it more reasonable, maybe we do a relevant or something else a little bit smaller that you can actually get to the table in a normal amount of time, usually you would think it would be the other way. You think they would kind of gear up to it.
Yeah,
but
we
now,
spent the last 10 years doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's an appetite for the big games.
Sure.
You know, and I'm just as guilty of it as everybody. I mean, I'm looking at my big box of Arcs, you know, with the Bladed Reach expansion. I'm looking at Kings of Ruin, which I got to play with my son because he enjoys those kind of games. I'm especially looking at Andromeda's Edge over there.
Yeah,
that's another beast of a game. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a market for them. But I do. It is weird because it is like almost a reverse of the way it used to be. Now we kind of have these big box games, and people actually talk about storage being a problem. Like,
sure.
I can't buy that game. I don't have room for it. And I'm like, well, then you got to make room for it. What is wrong with you?
Yeah.
I've watched the books on my bookshelves out in the living room slowly be kind of replaced.
Yeah.
These games creep into the bookshelves. It's like, I'm not touching the pictures. The pictures of the family are still there, but yeah, I'm going to find another spot to put those books, and we need more board game space.
Yeah.
It's a sickness. I
Things are constantly moving.
The first thing you got to do is admit that you have a problem, and I definitely have a problem.
Mm-hmm. That's why we're here, man. That's why we're here.
It's a community, a supportive community. That's what we were talking about. Right?
I think there's an essay there somewhere, Geof.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. What is wrong with me?
Either that or
that essay.
Either that or a support group. I'm not sure which. Maybe both. Yeah. Maybe both. Maybe both indeed.
Yeah.
You know. I mean, you got your family pictures, but some of those artwork on those board game cover boxes, Geof.
Oh,
I'm just saying.
Yeah. I mean, and I mean, I have like the Terraforming Mars big box out there, the Scythe big box out there. You know, these are beautiful boxes.
Mm-hmm,
you know, beautiful art on the sides. So yeah, I agree. I like that justification, that rationale. I love it.
This is what we're here for, man. This is what we do.
Right. We are enablers.
We're nothing if not enablers.
There you go. All right. Well, I got a small, tiny game just to kind of squeeze in here. I got a chance to go to the Asmodee secret back room and see some of the Asmodee releases for 2025. There's a bunch of games which I'll be talking about over the next couple of weeks. But a small one that just wanted to point out, because I know a lot of people out there are a big fan. There's a new love letter from Asmodee this time, and it's Arkham Horror Lovecraft Letter. So this is your love letter. Game which you do a little bit press your luck, a little bit of a deduction. It's not knocking other people out, but it's knocking other cards out. And it has the traditional love letter kind of mechanics where you start with a card, you pick up a card, and then you play a card. And your job is to knock out the other players at the table. What this one adds is a couple of things. First off, instead of the little adorable hearts, you have your sanity markers with your brains there.
You had to know insanity was coming into it at some point. I was just waiting for it. I was waiting for how we're going to get insanity into love letter. Yes. And there it is. The shoe dropped.
It's true. I mean, you know, love and insanity, you know, two sides of the same coin, so to speak. But in particular, what they do a little bit different here is some of the cards have a bottom, let's say, ability, but it's more like a curse, as a bottom curse. So as you play the cards in front of you, the cards that you play, there's actually something that happens, right? So you can actually flip cards over and get knocked out because of the cards that you've played. So there's an opportunity to go insane and knock yourself out of the game instead of just getting knocked out from other players. So a little bit of a twist on Love Letter. Good production quality and fantastic artwork. So if you love Love Letter, or you love Arkham Horror and you want something, you know, quick to play, Love Letter is a classic now. This will be coming out after Valentine's Day. I think they were shooting for Valentine's Day, but I think they're looking at March.
What more says I love you than the old ones and going insane? Really, that's what love's all about.
That's right. I mean, love for some people, insanity for the rest of us. There you go.
That's right.
Yeah, it's the gift that keeps on giving, and the giving is insanity. So
as I sit and rock in the corner,
well, you know, stuff. If you're single on Valentine's Day, you know, we've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, something else that I think they put out was, I think they're the people that put out Altered, which is a really interesting game. My daughter brought that one to my attention, and I kind of like that. I don't know have either of you guys had a chance to try that?
No, I haven't. No.
very, very brief like demo overview at PAX, but I did not get a chance to sit down and try it.
It's a very
I don't know if I need
interesting-
another card game.
Yeah, no, I hear that for sure, but I'm not really invested in any of those. So at
Sure.
this point, I mean, she's heavy into Lorcana, and I just no, that's a pass for me. But this one was kind of interesting because the central kind of feature is you have a hero and their companion, and there's a row of cards that represent sort of the land, and your whole goal is to get your hero and your companion together. And so you're playing cards against your opponent. It's a two-player game. And you're playing cards against your opponent basically to try to move from one card to the next. So you can try to move your hero, you can try to move your companion, you can try to move both. You might have to sacrifice moving your hero because your opponent is putting out stronger cards and are negating what you're trying to do over there. So then you can focus on the companion. And it has a couple of unique little mechanics and twists to it. And it's pretty short, and I thought it was different enough that it kind of caught my attention, because really the only of those kind of collectible sort of games that I ever bought into was Netrunner, which I absolutely adore. I'm like a heretic, I think, but I think it's Mr. Garfield's best game. Netrunner is a masterpiece.
Shots fired, man.
Oh yeah, over Magic any day of the week. But anyway, people can yell at me about that later. But this one was kind of interesting because it was a little bit different. So I would encourage people. It kind of rolled out with almost no fanfare.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost impossible to find online. You have to buy it from like a friendly local game store or a local game store that does do some online selling. Because like if you go to the big like retailers like Amazon or whatever, last I saw, they're not there. It's not there at all. So interesting little game. So I would encourage people to check that out.
Altered, right?
Yep, Altered. Yep,
Yeah.
Altered. Very interesting.
You can play, I'm assuming this is a base level version of it, on Board
Yeah.
Game Arena.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yes.
cool. All right.
So if you want to check that out, you can, because I remember seeing it there and I was like, I can't believe it's on Board Game Arena, but it is. So you can check that out.
I mean, I've been saying that for years. If you have a CCG or TCG, you should put it all online because people are still going to want the cards. You will sell more cards.
100%. Yeah.
Which Magic eventually did. Pokemon just did that with a new app. But do it right away. It's the best way to do it.
Excellent. All right. Well, those are the games that we want to hit the table. Now, on to the games that did hit the table. Let's talk about our at the tables, and we'll let you know if those games are a buy and you should run out and pick those games up. If those games are a play and you should sit down and enjoy them. If those games are a dodge and you should avoid them. Or in fact, those games are the dreaded burn, and just even going anywhere near them causes insanity. So, Anthony, what'd you play this week?
I have like the least insane game. Like straight up, this is like the most relaxing, chill thing. I played Windmill Valley. This is the new game from, well, I say new game, but she's putting out new games like every 6 months. So Danny Garcia, who designed Barcelona, which
Yay!
Chris, you and I both put on our top 100.
Big fan.
Beautiful game. Windmill Valley is their third game because there's a Kickstarter in there somewhere as well.
Mm-hmm.
But in this one, you are exactly what it sounds like. You are a tulip farmer in the Netherlands. You are growing tulips, building windmills, buying and selling tulip bulbs. It is all about the tulips, right? And you know that from the cover because the cover is windmills and tulips. Beautiful. The game itself, mechanically, it's not doing anything super crazy interesting. Like the actions are all fairly straightforward. You are planting tulips, which will help you score points. You have like a little field on your player board that you're filling in that gives you points at the end of the game. You're building windmills on the board, which activates rewards from the different locations on the board. So as you move around the board, you can build a windmill, and then you activate things around it based on where it is. You can hire people to get bonuses for different actions. There's contracts for in-game scoring. There's a market where you can trade stuff, all like normal Euro-y stuff. But the reason why I really like this game is that it has a upgradable rondel. So you have on your player board, there is a windmill that has these two wheels that will turn together. And this is not only is this the action you're going to take on your turn, but it is also upgradable. You can get new tiles to drop in there to make the actions better throughout the game. It's also the timer for the game. So as you move this forward, you can kind of control the pace of the game. If you really want to take an action, you jump ahead. All of a sudden, the game's a little bit shorter for everybody. Everybody has to react to that. it's a really fascinating mechanic. And that alone, just like I love the game for that, right? Everything else is fine. Like it's not quite up to that level of Barcelona for me. Which I really, again, top 100 game. But this one, it gave me a nice cozy vibe. It was very straightforward, easy to learn. All the actions make sense. They're all kind of flow, similar to Barcelona. Like everything out there makes sense. The visual language of the board is familiar and comfortable. And then you have this customizability that really, that's where the emergence and the complexity of the game comes out, is you have this option and opportunity to tweak and adjust and move your strategy in the way you want it to, based on A, what's available in the market, B, what you can afford to get, and C, kind of the direction that you've been moving throughout the game. So every game's a little bit different, and that's where a lot of the interactivity comes in. So this one is a buy. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. Like first time I played it, I'm like, it's not as good as Barcelona. And then the second time I played it, I'm like, it's not, but it's still very good. And then third time, I was like, yeah, no, this is good, and I'm going to keep it. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love that game. It's one of my favorite new designers. I think it's this is a designer that I've really started to take note of between Barcelona, Windmill Valley, and I think I just picked up Daitashi.
Same designer,
which I think is the same designer solely because of the name at that point. Because those two, Barcelona and Windmill Valley, are just so strong. Just fantastic games. So, like you, I think that this is definitely a buy, and this is a designer to watch. I think that these two games are just really exciting. I'm eager to dig into Daitashi and see what that has to offer. And shout out to my man Matt Gertz, who I believe is the originator of the Rondell. Loves me some rondels. I don't care what game it is, you put a rondel in that and I am on board. So whether it's Shipyard or any of Gertz's games I'm looking at over there, like Imperial and Navigador and Antique, those are all great games. So
good.
So awesome mechanism in board games.
It's fantastic. And it's the first time I looked at it, I'm like, they turn together, like it's little teeth on the wheels, and they turn together, and then those are the two actions that you have on any given turn, like the options that you have available to you.
And sometimes it's an either or, like at the start of the game, it's like you do this or that, but then later on, as you upgrade it, you get to do maybe both of those things. And then, like you said, you can really hone in on a specific strategy if you're looking for that, and those tiles come out. It's just beautifully produced, really well done, showing that you can make a great game without having to have tons of plastic from China, which may be really important in the future, depending on what happens with manufacturing in the board game industry. So I think it's really nice to think about games like Barcelona and Windmill Valley, because they use more traditional components, pretty much cardboard and wood, and yet the games are just fantastic, which kind of serves as a reminder that as much as I love my Andromeda's Edge with its beautiful minis, the ridiculous minis, are they necessary? No. Are they awesome? Sure. But you can still have a fantastic game experience with, what would be considered, basic components. It's really the gameplay that's the thing. So, I would also encourage people to try that game for sure. Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is Board and Dice again, same developer, and it's like $50, I think, online. So it's a reasonable price on top of everything else. It is lighter than Barcelona. People ask me that, like, is it heavier? Is it lighter? It is definitely lighter. The game is fairly straightforward. Really, again, the complexity comes in with mapping your path through the game. Like, okay, when do I upgrade these tiles? What makes sense? You don't want to upgrade all of them. That's a waste of actions, but where do you do it? How do you do it? When do you move? But the actual understanding of the rules, the wrapping of the brain around them, fairly straightforward. I played this with my 9, almost 10-year-old, and she had no problems. So pretty straightforward game.
Yeah, and we talked about this on the last episode. They're currently running a Kickstarter for upgraded components and extra promos and stuff like that. So
are they? Okay.
If you're interested in any of their games from Board and Dice, including this one, and obviously Barcelona, that's up there right now on Kickstarter.
If War of the Ring 2 Decades Edition had not been announced, I would have given Board and Dice a bunch of my money. But unfortunately, board game budget is shot for the next 3 months. So.
All right, Geoff, what about you this week?
I've played a lot. Fromage, that was fun. But I want to focus a little bit on Unconscious Mind. So Unconscious Mind is one that I managed to actually get a copy of before PAX. And so I've played it probably 5 or 6 times by now. Really, really interesting game. It has a very evocative theme, which is sort of the roots of psychoanalysis in Vienna in the time of Sigmund Freud and other notable therapists of that time period. The production is gorgeous. Took them, I think, a while to get the game out, but I think from a production standpoint, it really was worth the wait. Just a very intriguing game where you are basically meeting with other people, discussing your ideas to come up with insights. And you're going to use those insights in order to try to provide some therapy to your clients, right? And help them get over the various difficulties that they might be facing. So thematically, that all makes fantastic sense, right? Mechanically, it's a lot of color matching, it's recipe filling. And so the mechanics are very familiar to people who play a lot of Euro games. And it is this nice marriage of sort of Dixit style art that's brought in for the clients, their dreams. They have like their sort of manifest dreams and sort of latent, I think is the term they use, dreams. And so you're kind of trying to fill the recipe that's on the card that has this very beautiful evocative art in order to sort of clear that card and provide therapy points, which kind of moves the client towards being, I don't know if you want to use the term cured or to help them be better, right? Or feel better. And so all of that is kind of a really neat sort of mechanic. There are these cool overlays that go over the picture of the client. That's their grief layer. And you're trying to kind of help them sort of clear that. So there's all of these very interesting systems that are in place that all sort of thematically work together and mechanically are clear. And then there's a board that represents Vienna, the city of Vienna. And you are trying to move around this board and gather with other players' pawns, which are these beautiful little wooden pieces, or perhaps Freud himself. And then when you do sort of like a recall action, it's like a reset turn, you're going to look at where your pawn is on the board, and you're going to take, we call it the sleepy time action, because it literally has little Z's, like you're taking a break or going to sleep. And you can get some benefit on the board, and the number of pieces that are there is going to determine how many times you could take that benefit. Or you can look at the tags that you've collected from various other elements I won't get into. And if you have more tags than there are people, you can use the tags for the location instead of the people, and then that will increase the number of times you can take that action. And then there's like a weird little area where when you're taking that pass turn, you can, if you have enough reputation, you can put a marker there, and then that's going to give you sort of like almost a bonus turn, and then that counts towards an end game sort of scoring if you're in the different neighborhoods. So interesting, but felt almost like disconnected from the rest of the game and abstracted. Like, it's interesting to me because the whole treatment of the clients is very abstract. You know, you're looking at Dixit cards that are evocative of someone, you know, yearning to fly free through the air with the birds. Awesome. I love that, right? So this is a person who's really concerned with their personal freedom. And we like to have fun at the table trying to sort of interpret the cards, like what the person is actually looking for. And the sort of colors of the insights represent different sort of concepts, your sense of freedom, your passions and things of that nature. And then there's an expansion that brings in nightmares and your fears. It's like, it's all really awesome. And the mechanics kind of really fit. But then you have this weird, clunky sort of sideboard that seems almost like an afterthought that's almost a little distracting. Like you feel you should be doing things over there, but really the fun part is treating the clients. Like that's what you want to do. You want to gain the insights that you need using the systems in the game so that you can help these people. And that's like the fun, motivating part of the game, and sort of to me like the story of the game. And then the meeting at the table, which kind of determines the actions you're going to take. It all works really nicely together. And then there's the Vienna board. And I don't know why it's there. And I think that kind of bleeds a little bit into me with the topic today, which is why? Why is it there, right? Is it there for a reason? Is it there just to reinforce the idea that this started in Vienna? And you might go to the library or the coffee house or whatever and meet with people? Or is it solely just there for the sake of something else to do or be there? And I'm not even sure it's needed. So I know that sounds like a really negative sort of review of the game, but I've played it, like I said, 5 or 6 times. I've enjoyed it every time. And I've really tried to, in my last couple of plays, focus on the board to see if I can sort of determine why it's there, or if it's a viable path to victory, or am I missing something? And I don't know if I am. And it almost looks like an element that was kind of thrown in, and I'm not sure it needed to be there. So what is that added complexity and rules overhead? Because if I did a good job describing just verbally what the game's all about, I think you could probably follow what I was saying until I got to the Vienna board, and then things just get weird. Like that's when we start getting into the idea of rules and systems that seem to be there just to be there, rather than them adding anything significant to the story of the game or the narrative that the game is trying to immerse you in or get you to take part in. Yeah. So that was one of the things that actually, spurred me again thinking about this particular topic. Have either of you guys had a chance to play the game?
Yeah, we reviewed it maybe a month ago.
Really? I didn't hear that. All right, I'm sorry. That must be one of the episodes I did not hear, or that part I didn't hear. I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, no, we played it together, and I know Chris liked it a lot more than I did. I liked it a lot. I think we both gave it a good review, similar review to yours. And I think I had almost the same take of like, this is cool, everything flows together smoothly. I'm not 100% sure what's going on with the board here. I don't think it bothered me quite as much, maybe because Chris was talking me through like the actual theme behind it, which I think added something for me at least. But I can see what you mean, just in terms of like everything else is so tightly interconnected, and then that's a little off to the side. It's a little floaty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems contextually the game is about the development of psychoanalysis. Mm-hmm. So Freud and his contemporaries are developing the methodology for it, and they're drawing from a whole bunch of different areas of resources, because they were scientists, but also like you talk about the Vienna board. The Vienna board does 2 things. One, mechanically, it compensates you. It provides for you opportunities to gain the insight resources and do some mechanisms if you by chance didn't get the tiles that are pages in your book. So it allows you another area to go. Now, thematically, what it's all about is, if you were a person in that time, none of this stuff was developed as far as therapy was concerned. So what people of their time did was they were pulling from a whole bunch of different resources. So yes, you had the library, you had the coffee shop where they met, but you also had the theater and the art museums and all these other wondrous places where they got these kind of cultural concepts of how people are thinking and interacting. And especially if you are analyzing dreams, which is a main part of the game, but also a main part of psychoanalysis, you need that kind of cultural competency in order to understand the symbology and the archetypes of dreams. So the Vienna board, I would agree with you, Geof, like it does feel like a whole separate thing that you don't necessarily need or want to do, but it's there thematically because of that, but also it's there because if you didn't discuss it, if you didn't get those pages in your book to do a couple of things, which makes sense, right? Like if you're together with your colleagues, you caught up on all the things that there is. If you didn't, like if those spots kind of, shut down, then you can go to Vienna and kind of gain those same ideas. So thematically it works, but I agree. Like I would have liked the game more if it was focused primarily on the therapeutic kind of angle instead of more of the historical, we built this from scratch and these people were contemporaries and we learned stuff and we helped Freud and also there was therapy there. Like it's part of it. Like coming into the game, I thought it was going to be more therapeutically driven. Right. It's more historically kind of driven, like the creation of it. So like you're creating that book, that journal, you're writing treaties, right? So there's other elements to it.
Yeah, and I love that too. The writing of the you collect your research and then you publish your treatise and then other people can cite your research.
I love that citing part.
Very clever,
very smart,
very clever mechanism. There's just a lot to really like about the game. But yeah, and your explanation helps.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that, Chris. I think, as Anthony said, it kind of gives a little bit more insight to people out there who might be listening, wondering like, why was this a thing?
Right.
And why did they feel the need to include that in there? I think it might just have maybe, like you said, been either integrated a little bit more tightly or, and can we also just say, this is just me being an old man, what is the deal with the table hog games? I'm really getting to the point now. Like I have a very large table for my game room. It seems like every single game that I get now, I can barely fit it onto the table. It's like the meeting board, for example, right? Meeting board is sort of the meat of the game. That's where you're going to kind of go to take the actions that you're taking in the game. That probably could have been shrunk, even with my old eyes. You probably could have shrunk that by at least a quarter or a third, and it would have probably served the same purpose. Some of the iconography on the Vienna board, you increase the size of the iconography so it's clearer to see, but get rid of maybe a little bit of the background art. There's just a lot of space that games are the demands for space alone that games are taking is really kind of wild. Like, I set up Andromeda's Edge, eats the whole table.
Yeah.
The entire table.
I think this is crowdfunding. I think that in order to imply value, size is the compensating factor, right? Like this game is massive, therefore it's amazing and it's epic and it's scale.
Right. Good point.
10 years ago,
and it's worth the money.
yeah. And 10 years ago, Geof, like we would complain about games costing $60 or or $40, and we would kind of rationalize it like these mechanics are so complex and so dynamic, right? Like, and again, what was the box? The box was the size of a shoebox. Like it wasn't a big, and now everything needs to be big in order to imply that. And the same thing with the miniatures, right? Why is these games like you mentioned, Unconscious Mind has, if you got the upgrade pack, which I did, has really beautiful miniatures, plastic ones. You do not need those. The wooden ones are perfectly fine. The meeples that come along with the game, they're very cool. But every game needs to have X number of plastic pieces to it as well, because again, plastic means thing. Although, Geof, I will say one thing. You and I'm assuming this has never happened to you, because otherwise it would be in the first example. Mad King Ludwig, the castle. Remember they came out with a couple years ago, the massive pieces.
Yep.
They never showed any pictures of the game on a table. And to this day, I have not seen it from the company shown anywhere at any convention. So if you're out there and you back this, I'm certainly sure that you're buried underneath this game somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
mental image of this completely unplayable game.
Yeah. Tap on your podcast player phone and we will send help, because there's no way that fit onto any reasonable table in this life or the next. I'm just,
Well, everybody just needs their own table, Chris. You just got to make sure everybody brings their own table.
Bring your own table. That's right.
So that they can, you can, no, that is the poster child.
Yeah,
that's
BYOT. Make sure you
BYOT.
Yeah,
it's great.
Oh my!
All right. Well, I got a small game. Got something just squeezed in here too. This is something that was a small game, but hotly contested with Anthony and I way back in the day.
Okay, I know what this is.
This is Reykholt from 2018. Uwe Rosenberg's masterpiece.
Yeah. No trolling. Get out of here.
So you're competing against rivals in Iceland, and especially in Iceland, the genius
as
here,
one does.
The genius of the Icelandic people, please invite me. I will 100% come. It's all about how they're able to produce vegetables utilizing geothermal forms, because Iceland doesn't have the conditions necessarily, but they got a lot of heat, a lot of moisture, and they're able to work these greenhouses in such a way that you're able to produce amazing fruits and vegetables here. So the game itself is pretty straightforward, and also a very good thing. Uwe Rosenberg is known for his farming games, and this is certainly one of them. And this is more slimmed down. This reminds me of a shorter, kind of more compact versions of Gates of Loyang, because what you're doing is you're trying to serve all of these different vegetables to the table, and everyone is in a line trying to serve the same vegetables in a particular order. And as the game goes on, and as you move down the tables, you're trying to provide more and more of the same vegetables to that table. You do this by classic Uwe Rosenberg worker placement. You have 3 workers, and the 3 workers go out to the main board, and that main board, again, depending on the player count, could have 3 rows of 4, so it could have 12 different spots. And you're going to place it, and you're going to do typical farming things. So you can gain a greenhouse, you can gain seeds, and you can plant the vegetables into the greenhouse. And each of the greenhouse cards lets you know what vegetables can be planted there. So, greenhouse, plant, harvest. You'll get the vegetables, and then you'll, in a kind of quasi way, you'll pay the vegetables. You will give the vegetables to that table to complete that table's needs. And then it will allow you...
feed them. Do you have to feed them?
You have to feed the people again, basically. I mean, it's an Uwe Rosenberg game.
Always got to feed them.
You got to feed the people. But there's no stuff... You don't have to feed the workers, weirdly enough.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
No.
I mean, the Icelandic people, they're very hardy. They're fine. They share.
That's it.
Yeah, so you're just doing your work replacement stuff. You're moving down the trail. Everyone's racing down that pathway. There are some action cards, and you can take those action cards as well as a worker placement action. And those action cards do a wide range of things, very much like Agricola. There's a number of different decks that you can play with, and those different actions typically allow you to multitask. So maybe you can seed and harvest, so to speak. There are some spots that you can only take one particular spot in a column. And then towards the end of the game, you're going to sell off your greenhouses to maximize the number of vegetables. The really cool thing about the game is it allows you kind of a free movement. So if you're not, for example, growing carrots, you could skip that particular slot and go on to the next tables down the road. It's a very fairly compact game. The artwork is beautiful. The concept is beautiful. They have these nice little crates that fit the vegetables. It's that typical Uwe Rosenberg vegetable meeples kind of thing. And it's just generally a fun game. So for Reykholt and another Uwe Rosenberg classic farming game, I'm going to give it a play.
I have not had the chance to try that one yet, but I was close to pulling the trigger last year when it was on Amazon, I think, for a very, very reasonable price. And I thought, well, maybe I'll pull the trigger and give it a shot, but I didn't. But you made me intrigued. You made me intrigued. And so more farming, more feeding people, and 3 workers. God, he loves 3 workers. 3 shall be the number of the counting, and the number of the counting shall be 3.
Yeah, and this
4 shall how that count.
This plays up to 4, but you can play the solo, which is great. Right. Always could use a good solo Uwe Rosenberg game. And there's also a kind of story mode where like global effect cards come out and kind of give you a sense of, it takes that kind of really mechanical farming game and gives it a whole story and customers and things like that. So
nice.
It gives you a bunch of different dimensions for a game that is probably his slimmest most focused kind of farming game.
Would you say it's more focused than Newsford?
I like it better than Newsford. And that
really?
And that was our contention last year, Jeff.
He's wrong. That's the problem.
I'm it's fine. It's fine that I'm right, and I'm cool with that. But
okay, I'm just saying, I think you're wrong. I didn't like this game actually. So I felt it was I don't want to say dumbed down, but definitely boiled down version of Gates of Loyang, where just the decisions didn't feel very interesting to me. And it got samey very quickly. Like first play, I'm like, okay. Second play, I'm like, oh, it's the same. It was just the same path. There wasn't a lot of diversity there. So I don't find it super interesting. It is pretty though. I can't argue with that. Pretty game.
All right. Well, that's everything hit the table this week. Now on to our feature review. Our feature review this week is, of course, our guest feature. We're going to be talking about game design, quantity versus quality with Geof. So Geof, why don't you take it away?
Okay, guys. Here we go. So, as a old person, one of the things that I've noticed about sort of my sort of own journey through the hobby, if you want to call it that, is sort of thinking back and even looking at the games that are still on my shelves, I guess I should say. We did say it's a sickness. I have to acknowledge that. Yeah, just the idea of like what did I used to feel was very complex. What used to just fry my brain, and kind of reflecting on that and thinking about how many of those games seem almost sort of quaint to me, right? Based on the increasing complexity that we're seeing in game design in the hobby. And you can call this sort of like the Stefan Feld effect, which is we're just going to keep adding layers and systems, onto games to make them have more areas for you to think about, for things for you to consider, things for you to do, different ways to score points. Everybody's a winner. And I love Stefan Feld. Don't get me wrong. He's one of my favorite designers, but this sort of ever expanding world of choices and options, right? Leads to, this feeling of sometimes being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of things that you can do, right? So I think about a game from Uwe Rosenberg. We were just talking about him. And I think about Le Havre, right? You have a ship and you move it to the next spot, and you kind of like decide, do I want to take the offer that's there, or do I want to take my disc and activate a building to build another building, or to use a building that I've built? And so you really kind of have like 3 choices that you're making. The rules of the game, the systems of the game are pretty darn straightforward, very sort of easy to sort of understand, but in order to play the game well is going to be difficult. You're going to struggle at the constraints that are put in the game. And we all know that Rosenberg loves to use feeding as the primary way to constrain you and make you feel pressure and angst and everything else, right? So, and then you fast forward to a game like Feast for Odin, right? And so now we have just what some would consider an almost paralyzing number of options and choices. Now, a lot of those options and choices are sort of gathered into groups, I would say, of like things that are sort of similar. But when you look at the increasing complexity of those options, the polyomino tiles, the board that you're trying to fill, the bonus spaces you're trying to surround, the negative points that you're trying to cover, the cards that you can play, the dice you're going to be rolling, how are you going to mitigate that? How many people are you going to put out to strengthen that action? What spaces are available? What gets blocked? It quickly becomes this extremely convoluted, complex kind of experience. Now, again, I'm not necessarily trying to posit that that's a bad thing, but it's definitely a trend. And so what I'm kind of curious about is the resurgence of some games that are being republished or that people are sort of coming back to that are sort of, I think, hearkening back to a more streamlined design with fewer moving parts and pieces, because you don't need the sheer volume of parts and pieces in order to make an engaging gameplay experience, because the decisions that you're making are where the complexity is. The effects of the decisions that you're making in the game is where the complexity lies, where the replayability lies, where the sort of story of the game is going to unfold, right? So I'm thinking about games like Skyrise, right, which is a reprint. Super simple rule set. This is a game where you're basically taking a piece that has a bid number on it, and depending on the version you got, it's beautifully sculpted, or it's, not. It's a wooden piece, which is still pretty darn good looking, and you put it out, and that's your bid. And then somebody has to beat the bid, or they can't beat the bid, or they have their trump piece that they can put out that will automatically win that bid. And you have to be careful of where you place, because if I place this here and then somebody outbids me and they get this. So I'm not always necessarily placing where I actually want to go. I'm actually placing, hoping that someone is going to then place their piece here. I think this person then will pass, which will then give me the opportunity to use this piece to claim the spot that I'm actually aiming for. And all of that leads to a really kind of delicious sort of puzzle, kind of bluffing experience, bidding game kind of fiesta that is immensely fun and enjoyable. But, you could teach the game in 5 minutes. It's a really, really easy lift from a rules and complexity standpoint, but can be extremely engaging even with that smaller rule set. So I guess the question that I wanted to bring to the table tonight, and I really want to hear your guys' thoughts, is the idea of, is the increasing complexity a feature or a flaw? And the secondary question would be, if it's not a flaw, is it a direction that is sustainable? Because I kind of think we're getting to a point where I don't know how much more complex these things can get.
Right.
We're even integrating apps into games now. We're using other systems to represent systems in the game. And I just don't know how sustainable this is. I don't know if it should be sustained. I don't know if I just don't know. What I do know is that I always still enjoy experiencing new games and playing new games. That's why I have so many games. It's hard for me to say no. But I also know that there are a lot of older games that I play that I still think pack an enormous amount of punch when it comes to strategy and or tactics, quality of decisions, tension, enjoyment, in a much more simplified form than modern games. So that would be my sort of introduction to the topic. What are your thoughts on this, Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, I think So I think about this in a few different ways, because there's me, the gamer, right? And like, I really like crazy, stupid, ridiculously complex games, to the point where like every time I play it, I got to relearn the rules and I got to set it up and got to leave it out for 3 hours. Like, my number one game of all time now is Voidfall, which is potentially one of the most egregious in this way. It's super dense. But then there's me, the parent, where I don't want all that added layers of complexity because my kids can't keep that much stuff in their head at once. They're very smart. My daughter's, just loves games and she loves math. So if I can find a game it can have all the emergent complexity in the world, but if it has too many different types of mechanics, they just can't remember all the rules up front. And then there's me, the teacher, where it's like that times 10, because these are students who haven't played anything since they played Monopoly with their parents when they were 10, right? They're 19 years old. And so then you throw anything at them more than like one mechanic and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is too much. So I think we have like these gradations here, and it really comes back to this idea of like the breadth of complexity versus the depth of complexity, right? Like, how much emergence is there within the game? Like what you talked about, like, it's a very simple decision. There aren't that many different permutations of that decision, but you have to think of like the 12 different things that are going to be impacted by that decision. Like, if I go here, then they'll go here, and then they'll take this, and I can't take that. Like, and that is the more interesting type of complexity for me, because as a parent, as a teacher, as a podcaster, like, those are the types of games that I can share with more people. I can teach more easily, that I don't have to worry about the rules getting in the way of the enjoyment of people playing it. If I send my students home and say, you need to learn the rules for the games by Tuesday, they can do that, right? They can watch a 10-minute video and come back to class and have a general idea, versus, go learn the rules to even something like Everdell, right? Like, it's worker placement and there's cards, but now you have to remember what all the cards are. It's just a little too much. So I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing. I just think you have different audiences. What I think is the problem now, and I think you alluded to this, is that we are getting more of that. And I think there's like maybe 2 or 3 reasons why that's happening. One, I think a lot of designers are thinking like, what can I do that's different and new or unique? So you get games like Ark Nova, which people love, and I'm not saying it's a bad game, but Ark Nova is literally just like, let's take like 30 mechanics from a bunch of different really popular games, throw them in a blender and add some cute animals to the cards, and we have a game, right? It's well done, but that's what it is. And it's just a bunch of random stuff kind of mixed together. So then that's when you get games like mini games on top of layers, on top of mechanics, layering on top of each other. And then 2, which I'm sure, Chris, you could speak to more, because this is like your pet peeve, is crowdfunding, right? You get these crowdfunded games, and 1, they want to put as much stuff in the box to prove value, which we just talked about. 2, the games aren't really play tested the same way like a traditionally published game would be. So they're like, let's throw a bunch of stuff in the box, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but stuff, right? And that's what you see with like Mind Clash. There's no editor in the room. There's nobody saying like too much stuff, right? It's like, it reminds me of reading George R.R. Martin's 4th book in the Song of Ice and Fire, but it's just like, this book could have been 40% shorter, but you don't have an editor anymore because you are George Martin, right? We get that with board games now too. It's just like, this is too much stuff. You need an editor. You talked about playing Civolution recently, and that was kind of my response to that game from Stefan Feld, is like, there's too much going on. It's too many things to keep track of. I don't want to teach this game to people. It's going to be hard to teach. It's a cool system, but it's just too many layers, too many possible mechanics. So I guess I broke it down in a way too many ways there, but I do think there's like different gradations and layers here. And it's a lot of it is like, it is increasing because of the economy of, tabletop games.
Yeah, I think, Anthony, you mentioned 2 things that pop for me. Is I think this, Geof, what you're saying, I think is just accepted. This is the way the world is right now. One of them is because mechanics are not trademarkable. So I can create a game right now and have it, be a deck builder, a worker placement, right? Like, I could just do that. Like, nobody can stop me, right? So how do you stand out? Like, what makes your game different, right? Like, legally, your game needs to be different, even if the mechanics are somewhat the same. And we see this from designers. Like, we just talked about Uwe Rosenberg. He has seemingly an endless list of games that are relatable to gardening and farming and stuff like that. So some games are, again, Reykholt, and some games are Feast of Odin, and then there's everything in between, right? So variations on the same song, so to speak, right? A little bit more, a little bit less here and there. And then, Anthony, you mentioned about crowdfunding. Now, crowdfunding itself is not the problem. Without crowdfunding, we would not have all of these amazing independent games at the table. And certainly we would not have some of these massive games that the designers like Isaac Childress, like he would not, bring Gloomhaven to a local friendly game store, right? Like he couldn't just drop those games on someone's shelf. So
not without breaking it.
Well, the shelf would be there temporarily.
Fair, yeah.
So it comes down to, Anthony, like you're saying, like the scaffolding of just bringing more and more mechanics to kind of overlay to show or to prove value. You need an equal amount of communication and education to make that plausible to get to the table or plausible to sell to an audience, right? Like It does 10 different things. It slices, it dices, it juliennes, right? Like if you remember those old kind of infomercials.
Yeah. Now how much would you pay?
That's right.
Well, don't answer.
So
act now and will include.
So any good Swiss Army knife should have at least 25 things pop out of it.
Yeah.
And then inevitably you use like the blade and maybe the screwdriver on it. And that's pretty much it. So I don't know. So
I think it's part of the reason though, like, and just not to derail or anything, but like, I think we talked about Ian O'Toole specifically, like with Voidfall and Lacerda games, not this week, but like in the past. We've reached the point with that kind of complexity where it, like with the teaching and like the giving people the tools they need to learn the game.
Yes.
That if you don't have an Ian O'Toole, it's not going to work. Like, I don't think Voidfall works as a game if it's not designed visually the way it is. Same with a lot of Lacerda games.
Right.
And so maybe that's a tell, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's a lot.
Well, and you also are asking people to, I think there's actually been academics who have looked at the language, the visual language of board games, the symbology of board games, right? There are certain symbols, the open hand is income, and, the way in which things are laid out in a graphic design sense is being used more and more. It's almost becoming a little bit of a language of its own in seeking to make games language independent, to not have to have like every card printed in every language. They're relying more on iconography, which is becoming more complex, more layered, and almost a whole different language that if you're familiar with that language, you can pick it up pretty quickly. But if you're not familiar with that language, it's a huge barrier, right? But I think one of the things, too, that I wanted to touch on, if it's okay, is I want to know, sometimes I don't understand what the purpose of the complexity is, right? So since we're talking about Lacerda, I'm going to talk about two Lacerda designs here, right? So I'm going to talk about On Mars, and I'm going to talk about Weather Machine, okay? So On Mars, I think, has a pretty steep, decent amount of complexity to it and its systems, okay? Mm-hmm. How you can build things on the planet, whether you are up in orbit trying to do things, whether you're down on the planet trying to do things. It's like two completely different things sort of going on that you have to try to manage. Your rovers kind of moving around on the surface, and your habitat modules that you're building and the other modules that you're building. But all of that complexity serves the narrative of the game. It all makes sense in terms of, if we were doing this stuff on Mars, what might be some of the challenges that we're going to have to deal with, right? And those challenges in, habitable living spaces, resources, bringing things down to the surface, up from the surface, back into orbit. These things all make sense, right? And so that complexity can find a home in the sort of concept maps that we build in our minds as we're learning and playing the game. And then you have a game like Weather Machine, right? Now I'm looking at it. I bought it. I've played it. I've enjoyed it. But you said something I think that was really important, Anthony, which is this idea of every time I play it, I have to relearn it. And why do I have to relearn it? It's because a lot of the systems of the game don't actually seem to serve. They're so disconnected. They're so mechanical in and of themselves that I find it very difficult to remember because there's not a ton of internal logic, if that makes any sense, right? On Mars has a higher degree of internal logic than whereas Weather Machine doesn't. I would argue that the Gallerist has a higher degree of internal logic. You have different kinds of customers that might be coming to your gallery for different reasons. And that's why the meeples are different colors. And you're trying to attract them. You're trying to sponsor new talent and then trying to promote that talent. All of that makes sense, right? Vinos, the complexity there makes good sense. Lisboa, you're starting to stretch. A lot of the stuff going on in Lisboa when it comes to the church, right? When it comes to the central area where you're rebuilding, but you're kind of just putting out these tiles on this, if I remember correctly, it's like a rectangular grid. And it's abstracted to the point where there's nothing for you to kind of hang your understanding on. And so therefore, every time you want to try and approach that game, you have to almost approach it fresh and relearn how these things are connected, because they are connected, but they're connected like this. Okay. Like if you can't see this because it's a podcast, I like have like my two thumbs just kind of barely touching. Whereas other games like Windmill Valley, it's like they're gears and they're very clearly connected and they rotate and move together. The systems in the game work together to create this experience, as opposed to this very tenuous hold that some other games have. Is there anything in that resonates with you, Chris, or do you think I'm off base on that?
No, I think for a decade plus, I think the gold standard has always been thematic gameplay. That the game itself should be created and played in such a way that it utilizes the gamer's already established understanding. And we've talked about this recently with Uwe Rosenberg, right? Like, I don't know what it was like to farm back in the day, the Agricola days. Right? I don't. I wasn't there. I have no idea. I've never farmed before. I've planted
Never had a cow in my house.
No.
Right. Never had a cow in my house.
No. But I do understand the basic concept of you plow the land, you plant the vegetables, and you harvest. Again, based on the complexity of it. So I can make logical assumptions and leaps, and there are already pre-established understandings that lead us there. So when those things are not there, coupled with the complexity, and as Anthony mentioned, coupled with either challenging game design or graphic design, then it's all bets are off, right? And we've played so many games like this where, for many reasons, the game is abstracted on one level or the other, where it's mechanics, it's artwork, it's graphic design, it's layer on top of layer. So thematic, gameplay is essential. I will say the other thing about crowdfunding, especially back in the day, that I really wish would return, and I understand some of this is a production level. Back in the day when they would release games on Kickstarter, and they were like, we have a game, we have a concept, this is a game, and it does these things, right? So the campaign page was almost informative and connecting to the community, and the community gave feedback that helped the designer, like it was still a work in progress, more or less. So people could give, like, the population could kind of give some feedback and say, hey, I don't understand why this is or how this is, or this seems like a mechanic I don't get. So then they would have a giant, or at least a bigger pool of game testers, at least abstractly. And I think we've seen this with Stonemaier games, and we've seen this with Mindclash games, and a couple of other publishers where their game testing is just too small. and it's based on people who already know the system. And I think, like you said, Geoff, too, in a perfect world, the game industry, tabletop gaming, would have universal symbols for things, like you said, the handout, right? Like, so that every game would use that. But in a world where everybody wants to do their own thing or be their own thing, learning a tabletop game in a lot of ways is like learning a new language or learning an algorithm or learning to code, because that's really what it is when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I really like the language metaphor. I think that's what I always end up returning to, because I think of games as texts, right? That's partly the teacher in me, but it's authored by a human being, and that author has intent and purpose, and they put things in there for a reason, whether those reasons are to further gameplay or just to make the game look bigger. But like, if you think about it in terms of like an author, somebody writing a book, right? You can have the most complex book in the world, but if it's written in a way that flows and makes sense and speaks to what the reader's trying to get from it, like, you could read Ulysses where half the book is in another language and you don't quite understand it, but it still works for you because that's what you're trying to get out of it. But if you threw Ulysses at, a junior in high school, their brain's going to explode because they're not ready for that. They haven't built up to that. They haven't read the Faulkner and the Melville and the Pynchons of the world to get up to a level of like processing and just hacking your way through James Joyce. So like, I see that a lot, like with the scaffolding with the students, with scaffolding with my kids. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with having complex games that are doing interesting things, but one, the author needs to know why they're doing it. Speaking to your point, Geoff, like, why am I putting this here? What is the point of this? If the theme doesn't reflect that, if the actions of the player don't reflect that, if the scaffolding is not in place through the other actions of the game or just general game knowledge or the artwork of the game, then what is the point of putting this here? And, whether you need editors or playtesters or outside feedback to tell you that, somebody needs to do it. And then B, is the game communicating clearly through its theme how you're going to be able to use that stuff? So then, yeah, you talk about Weather Machine. I had the same problem with that game. I love Lacerda. All the games you mentioned, I love. I own all of them. Weather Machine I got rid of because I'm like, I can't quite connect actions to theme or artwork. It's too abstract, and for a game this complex, that doesn't work. So the author, in this case Lacerda, stopped thinking about that connection and how they're communicating it. Like, the rhetorical awareness kind of dissipated a little bit, and then the audience got forgotten about, and the game became the focus. And I think once we do that, then, I mean, even a simple game cannot work if you do that. I remember bringing Living Forest to my class, which is a relatively light, simple game. I've taught it to my kids, and my students couldn't handle it because the rule book assumed this too much from them. It assumed a lot of knowledge about like what drafting was and how cards worked and how actions worked. It didn't actually teach them anything or build the things they needed to learn it. So despite the game being, a Kennerspiel nominee, it was too complex for these adults because it just, the layers weren't there. The scaffolding wasn't there. It made too many assumptions. So I think that can apply to any complexity of game at any level, same as it could for any kind of book. And some of that comes down to us. Like, don't bring Voidfall or Weather Machine out and have like, some brand new gamer come and play. But at the same time, what do people need to be able to play them?
Well, stop telling people that Wingspan is a gateway game.
Yeah,
that's another classic. I love Wingspan. I think it's a really fun game, but it's like that is not a gateway game.
No,
you
there's
try
like
to
5
teach
mechanics in there
to a non-gamer, and it's just not gonna go well. There's a great video on TikTok for as long as that's going to be around of Mandy Patinkin. Trying to learn.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. Like, he and his wife trying to learn Wingspan, and but it's to your point, Anthony, which is that there are assumptions that I think sometimes game designers make, that their audience is that this stuff is all understood,
right?
And I think that that's kind of unfortunate, because by and large, probably for 80%, 90%, I'm just picking those numbers out of the air, of the people who buy these kind of games, they probably do understand. But you're losing a part of your audience because you're not fully explaining those things, right? And then when you bring that up, as I have to publishers in the past, they're like, well, we can't have that. The rule book's too long. You can't make the rule book that long. It's like, well, you can, because, you could, if you really want to make sure that, anybody could pick this up, and, learn the game, then yeah, you kind of have to explain everything as if, they wouldn't know what drafting is or whatever. Right. And that's another thing that I kind of want to circle back to with Chris is, that idea of, are certain times, because of crowdfunding, and because of publishers feeling that stress to kind of, just keep pumping out games, trying to find their evergreen, the sort of churn and burn, we don't have 20 or 30 titles coming out. Oh, and by the way, Chris, kudos to you for using the term back in the day. I really appreciate that. I think I counted 3 different times you said back in the day. And I said, look at Chris go, trying to make the old man feel seen. I feel seen, Chris. But yeah, that whole idea of there used to be like a very small number of games released every year. And now there's no way. That's one of the things that got me out of podcasting, quite frankly, because it was too much. It was overwhelming. Like trying to play the things even that the guests that I was having on the show wanted to play. Sure. I was I was always playing something with my group saying, okay, guys, we got to try and play this game. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be doing a show about this game. I want to at least have played it. And it just ended up being more of a job than something that I was doing for community release, enjoyment, that kind of stuff. Right. But I think that point of that cycle, that pressure to produce, really has sometimes led to some things that seem kind of obvious being missed. I agree with you, Chris. Mm-hmm. There are some companies out there, and if we're gonna kind of talk about Stonemaier, I think that they deserve to maybe take a little hit over things like the initial release of Tapestry, but then I also think I got to give them a little bit of kudos for then opening up to the feedback from the community and saying, okay, hey, which of these factions is kind of, maybe we do need to come up with a system to balance these factions, or at least make people aware of the differences in, sort of the innate power of these different factions, try to make sure that people have a good experience. Right. But that's after the fact, right, Chris?
Yeah. I think a lot of this comes down to what you've been saying, Geof, is complexity is not the issue. Complexity for the sake of complexity, for, I guess, on behalf of the publishers. And if you're going to do it for the sake of, or showing value, or then communication has to match that level of complexity. Mm-hmm. And in a world of public, publishers and commercial markets, and the speed in which a Kickstarter now runs. Back in the day, see, Geof, I did it again.
There we go.
When a crowdfunding or a Kickstarter would come out, that game would be up there for 8 weeks? I mean, it would be there for quite some time, and people can contemplate it. And now it's all about get it up, get it backed, and then get it out, right? Like it's not about that so much. So yes, more people need to be able to see the game. So crowdfunding things need to be up there maybe a little bit longer. And I think that's challenging for a publisher. They don't want the game to hang out there necessarily so much. And then the rule book, like you said, Geof, and the challenge with that is that you do need to bring somebody in there who can break it down. So sometimes, and I hate to say this, but sometimes the designer is the worst person in the world to write the rule book. Like, because we've all read those rule books, and they read like stereo instructions, right? Like, you attach this and this and this. We just did a panel presentation on teaching tabletop games, and it's just conceptually, you don't teach it by its parts, right? You teach first and foremost what it is, right? I have these things. It's got 4 legs. It's got a big rectangle top. Do you mean a table? Start with table. Start with table, and then work your way backwards. You don't have to name each leg individually.
Or start with the goal,
yes.
Right? Like, what are you trying to do? Like, what's the point? And that point could be score the most points.
And,
and now let me tell you the different ways that you could score points.
And complexity needs to serve that goal, right? Thematically,
right.
does it serve that end, or is it just another mechanic to make you feel like you accomplished something or you did something else? And again, goodness gracious, this plays 1 to 8 people. No, it does not. This plays 15 minutes per player or an hour tops. It does not, right? Like, this game is good for ages, blah, 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 blah. It is not, right? Like, again, you want to have a wide net as a publisher, but knowing that people play a game typically that one time and they're either sold on it or rejected from it, that's got to be right down the road, right? It has to be best at this player count. It has to be a gateway game or not a gateway game. Not everything's a gateway game. Just doesn't work that way. Like,
and not everything needs to be a solo game.
No, not everything. Oh my goodness gracious!
Not everything needs to be a solo game.
No, it doesn't.
So many bad solo modes lately. So many.
Oh my god, everything. It's like a de facto part of every game now.
I love solo modes, but they're just so bad now. Like that's a 50-50, like 50-50 shot.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's okay for a game not to play best at every player count.
Right.
And
there are some games that I do not own simply because you have to have 4 or more people to play it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. Like I'm okay with that because I do know some people that have those games. And when I can get a big group like that together, then we can play that. But for me to purchase that game, put it in my collection, one of 2 things is going to happen. It's going to sit on the shelf and it's never going to get played. Or I'm going to try to play it with fewer players, and it's not going to be a very fun experience. It's just not going to be good. And then I'm going to be judging that game based on that experience, which isn't really fair to the game or the design. But, again, there's incredible pressure on publishers to try to cast that wide net, as you said, Chris, right?
Yeah, I think
try to make sure that they can market the game. Which is why I think probably the most useful feature sometimes to me on Board Game Geek is just that community rating for the best at what player counts, right? Because I often find that to be very, very useful, right? I'm not going to say that it's always accurate, but I kind of think it's more accurate than it's not, because the community will tell you. No, this game says, like you just said, Chris, it plays 2 to 5, but it's a 3 to 4 player game. Le Havre, for example, I would never play Le Havre at 4 players. Never. I like it best as a 2-player game.
Yeah, Le Havre's
3-player, okay, but like 4-player, oh my God, you're going to sit there.
And Le Havre's a very good example, Jeff, because that's one of those games where, depending on, I think at some point you're not going to be able to get a good resource, right? Like, depending on player order, like at some point it just falls off a cliff.
Yep.
Like you can still play, but the first 3 people are going to get the ideal choices, and then you get consolation gift. So
pretty much, yeah, and also just the incredible amount of downtime, and there are just some games that, like I don't know, like I would even make the argument that Unconscious Mind I like better at 2 and 3. Than I do with the full player count.
Sure.
Between the spatial issues of trying to set up that game for that many people, and again, it's a game where it's like, okay, I can do this, which will then trigger that, which will let me do this, which then gives me this, and so by the time someone has gone through their turn, there can be a decent amount of time there. As opposed to other game designs like Rondell's, which kind of have micro turns, where it's like, okay, I move here, I do this, done.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of games that can really sing at higher player counts. But the publisher's always going to put 2 to 5 or 2 to 4 or whatever it happens to be, because you don't want to turn away a sale. And in some ways, it's like, I get that. Like, none of these publishers, especially the small publishers, are in a position to turn away possible sales. By and large, I think it's one of the things that, because I've been involved with publishers in the past, and I've worked with publishers, a lot of these people are in it for the passion that this is what they want to do. And unless you're a Hasbro, an Asmodee, one of these, really big board gaming companies, you're not like making the kind of money that people think you're making. And for you to intentionally say this game should not be played unless you're playing it with 3 to 4 players, even though you can play it with 2. And yes, I agree that it's probably suboptimal with 2, but if I don't put 2 on the box, I've now reduced my sales by 3,000 units or 2,000 units or whatever. That's a big deal to a lot of these small publishers.
I will say one thing though, because again, if you take movies, right? Everybody wants to hit all 4 quadrants, right? I don't know much about movies, but I know I've heard this 4 quadrants, right? You want to be able to hit all the different populations of people who come to movies. But we know movies can't be everything to everybody.
Right.
So the best crowdfunding that happens, Simon's a good example of this, is when you provide the experience that people think that they're getting. So next time you do a crowdfunding, they're going to come back to you.
This is true. Yeah.
And
that's an excellent point.
And I think for a publisher, that's really what they want more than anything else. They want to know that the games are going to go to the right people so that they can crowdfund again, because that's crowdfunding is amazing. Crowdfunding is best when it's done well, it's communicated possibly, and it hits the right audience so that they come back again and again, right? Anytime a CMON game comes up, I'm always looking at it. I never, I don't think about it twice. Of course, I'm going to look. That's coming up. It's something I'm thinking about backing because they know their audience. They communicate the complexity of the game, and it matches up quality. Right? Especially like you said, the complexity requires a higher level of communication across the board, right? If it's Candyland, not so much.
Yeah,
but
Yep. No, that's an excellent point. It's just it's an interesting hobby,
very much,
and the stakeholders are, we're all sort of interconnected because we rely on them to bring us the content, right? The designers through the publishers, or the designers themselves through crowdfunding, right? And they rely on us to, buy, promote, by and large, their games. I mean, you're not seeing commercials on television for board games. It's pretty much some websites and word of mouth, people talking about games with other gamers, and then they want to check that game out. They want to buy that game, right?
It's very experience, word of mouth kind of situation.
Yep. And it's all very sort of interconnected. And I think you raised some excellent points about the idea of that communication and the community, kind of circling back to what you talked about at the beginning with the paper, this idea of community, right? That's one of the reasons I've always been drawn over the past few years to Orange Nebula, right? Because when they do their Kickstarters, they are actively always looking for people to interact with the campaign, right? They're putting out the rules right away. They're letting you know what you're going to get, the different things that you could get, the different levels that you can do. And then they're asking you to engage. Hey, we have this idea for this is the theme. We would love to come up with a community pack of cards that we're going to design right now during this Kickstarter based on your input, right? And that's just a fun thing to take part of, because then it kind of brings feedback to them about what their audience is thinking about this game could be, or about what that idea could look like. So it's helpful to them. They're kind of getting some free creative ideas, but they're also then being responsive to the community of people who are going to be buying their games, which is what you're talking about, Chris, right?
Yes.
And building a product that you're pretty sure is going to satisfy the customers, right? But that can also quickly go awry, right? Like Ryan Lockett is one of my favorite designers. I love Ryan Lockett's games. I know you guys have some mixed feelings about him. He did a little tiny card game called Rome that was a very clever little game. And he did a Kickstarter for it. And one of the kind of Kickstarter sort of bonuses that he put in, and I think this might have been like the last time he did this, was this little sort of side component to the game where you get these little gems and you put them on your gem map, and then if you fulfill this, it's going to be worth this many points. And it was like completely disconnected from anything else that the game had to do with. And it was there for the sake of being there for a Kickstarter sort of a thing. And that's where the crowdfunding can get away from you,
Sure.
right? That's where you can end up with things being added, since we're talking about complexity, that really might not have even been part of the original vision of the game. They're just thrown in there because it's like, oh my God, well, we reached our goal. What can we do to extend this? Well, I had this kind of idea, like we could do something like that. Yeah. Put that in there. That's going to be the next stretch goal. Let's do that. Okay. And like you said, that's where you end up with some sort of not fully baked things making its way into a game that might not have even been part of the original playtesting.
Yeah.
Right? It was a spur of the moment decision.
Sure. And I think inevitably in the end, I think there's always going to be more ideas. There's going to be more complexity. Mm-hmm. There's going to be expansions. There's going to be promos. There's going to be more stuff. And we've seen that. But to kind of pull it all together, I think, as you're saying, Geoff, with that, and I think maybe it's Uncle Ben who said this best, with great complexity, comes the great responsibility to communicate, right? Like, so the greater the complexity, ergo equals, therefore, you have to have even greater communication, whether it's in the rule book, whether it's in the marketing, whether it's in, the player count, or, how does it fit with certain gamers? Because that complexity has to be carried by the gamers at the table. Mm-hmm. And it's a much easier lift if the communication goes along with it. Because complexity is good, but complexity for complexity's sake is a recipe for disaster. Yes, maybe I'll back your game that first time, but I will never back it again. So, all right, well,
natural consequences.
True.
There you go.
All right, any last thoughts, Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth. I don't know. I think it's worth all of us thinking about, especially the people making the games. Mm-hmm. Like, who's it for? Let's be aware of who it's for and how you're going to communicate to them and what you want them to take away from it. I think if you can't answer those three questions, you should go back to the drawing board. Don't publish your game until you know the answers to those three questions, and I think we'll be in a lot better place.
Absolutely. All right, Geoff, I'll leave you the last word.
Well, my last word is that was fun. It's actually 3 words. So yeah, thank you guys for allowing me to come on your show and have a fun conversation with you. I appreciate it. I appreciate the work that you do and the time that you put into it. And thanks for letting me prattle on about this little idea that's been worming around in my head for a while. I appreciate getting it out of there. And so thanks for your time, and appreciate you letting me on the show.
And Geoff, thank you for bringing great communication to a complex issue.
Yes. Yeah. Been a great conversation.
All right, everyone. So until next time, this is Chris.
And this is Anthony.
And this is Geoff.
And we'll save you all a seat at the table. Take care, everyone.